Our first speaker is Zainab Khan, and she's going to summarize the report, Human Rights Watch. And then we're going to have Narmeen, an Iraqi mother who has suffered torture. And then we're going to have Haifa telling us about recent events to do with women's status. And then we're going to have Mike Phipps from Iraqi Occupation.
Mike will be before me.
Before you? Okay, Mike Phipps, I'm sorry, I'll be corrected. Mike Phipps from Iraqi Occupation Focus is going to be talking about justice and accountability for Iraq. So then we'll start with Zainab. Thank you.
Can you please just turn off your mobiles,
yes,
if possible? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm just going to do a small summary of the report of the Human Rights Watch, and I'd like everybody to actually read it. It's 110 pages, but it's really worth reading completely. Summary. In May 2012, Hanan al-Fadl, not her real name, was shopping in a market in central Baghdad when security forces dressed in civilian clothing seized her, bundled her into a car and drove her to the office of a state institution. There they beat her, subjected her to electric shock and drenched her in cold water to force her to admit to bribery. Hanan, a manager at a state-affiliated company that approves construction projects, was paying the price of refusing to wave through a project. She said, "I didn't know someone important in the government had a stake in the project." Beaten and tortured for hours, Hanan only confessed after her interrogators threatened her teenage daughter, saying, "We can take her just like we took you." Security forces took Hanan before a judge, who, despite her appearance, refused to acknowledge her injuries. 4 months later, a Baghdad court convicted her for forgery and sentenced her to 3 years imprisonment, based solely on her confession and the testimony of a secret informant. Hanan is one of thousands of Iraqis imprisoned by a judicial system plagued by torture and rampant corruption. Last April, United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay, issued scathing indictment of Iraq's justice system, citing numerous convictions based on confessions obtained under torture and ill treatment, a weak judiciary and trial proceedings that fall far short of international standards. As of June 2013, over 1,000 women were in Iraqi prisons and detention centers, according to the Iraqi government's Human Rights Committee and the United Nations. It is estimated that the male prison population is over 40,000. The abuse of women by Iraqi security forces and the violation of their rights by Iraq's judiciary is an increasingly contentious issue. Iraqi media reports that security forces have been unlawfully detaining and abusing women. In response to the media reports and mass protest against the treatment of women in detention, Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki announced in January 2013 that he would task Deputy Prime Minister Hussein al-Shahristani with overseeing reforms to the criminal justice system. A year later, the government has not made any reforms, and the justice system remains plagued by corruption and abuses against women of all sects, classes, and regions. Now I'm going to summarize the main findings. The report documents abuses which the criminal justice system subjects women to during arrest, interrogation, trial, and imprisonment. The report finds that security forces carry out illegal arrests and other due process violations against women at every stage of the justice system, including threats and beatings. One woman, while on Iraq's death row, entered the interview on crutches. Weeks of beating, electric shocks, and falaqa, which is when the person is hung upside down and their feet beaten, left her with scars, burns, and permanently disabled. She was later executed despite lower court rulings dismissing charges against her because the medical reports documented she was tortured into confessing her crime. Many women interviewed by Human Rights Watch have shown scars on their bodies consistent with the torture they described. The report finds that women are subjected to threats or actual sexual assault, sometimes in front of husbands, brothers and children. They lack adequate protection from attacks by male prison guards, including those from adjoining male prisons. There are reports of sexual assaults by prison guards resulting in pregnancies. The likelihood of a woman being subjected to sexual assault is far higher during arrest and interrogation. We expect that they've been raped by police on the way to the prison, stated one employee at a women's prison facility. Women are forced into confessions by interrogators threatening to hurt loved ones. Many women told Human Rights Watch they were forced to sign or fingerprint confessions, statements they were not allowed or could not read. High female illiteracy makes women especially vulnerable to this type of abuse. In many cases, women told Human Rights Watch they were forced to sign or fingerprint blank pieces of paper. Security forces conduct random and mass arrests of women amounting to collective punishment for alleged terrorist activities by male family members. Authorities exploit anti-terrorism laws to settle personal and political scores by detaining, charging and trying women based on associations with individuals, tribes or sects. In almost all cases documented by Human Rights Watch, convictions were based on coerced confessions and secret informant testimony. Women have little or no access to an adequate legal representation, either because they cannot afford it or because lawyers are fearful of taking a politically sensitive case. Women are frequently detained for months or even years without charge or trial. This contravenes Iraqi law prohibiting arbitrary arrest and detention and giving the right to counsel. In many cases, judges and the investigating officers colluded to extract bribe from detainees and their families to secure their release. In several cases, women paid bribes but remained detained. In others, judges accepted bribes from security forces to issue or prolong arrest and detention orders and ignore allegations of abuse by security officials against female detainees. When one woman told investigative judge that she had been raped and tortured, the judge responded by telling her, "Do you want them to pamper you?" Many women, like men, remain in detention long after judges have dismissed the charges against them or served their sentences. In February 2013, Deputy Prime Minister al-Shahristani acknowledged to Human Rights Watch that authorities had held detainees in prison for months or even years after judges issued orders of their release because they lacked the necessary Interior Ministry approval. Prison conditions fail to meet international standards for women's detention, including no facilities for childcare, poor hygiene and overcrowding. Iraqi law allows children under the age of 4 to remain in prison with their mothers. There have been instances of children remaining in prison until they are 7. A prison employee told Human Rights Watch that in one instance, a child incarcerated with his mother, who was on death row, remained in prison several weeks after she was executed. The Iraqi government claims it informs prisoners about complaints mechanisms. Most women interviewed were not aware of any grievance procedures. Factors that discourage women from filing complaints or seeking redress for abuse of rights in detention include the lack of legal representation, mistrust in the representation when provided, fear of retaliation, stigma and rejection by families and the wider community. The official response. Deputy Prime Minister Shahristani and Justice and Human Rights Ministers have dismissed reports of abuse of women in detention as exceptional cases. Justice and Interior Ministry officials claim media and NGO reports of abuses are exaggerated based on detainee lies. Human Rights Watch's research, their first-hand interviews, and those of other organizations indicate that abuse is common and systemic, perpetrated at all levels of the security forces and in a wide variety of locations, including police stations, prisons, and military detention facilities. Okay, anti-terrorism law. Interviews with female detainees, lawyers, and judges indicate that authorities are detaining many women under Iraq's anti-terrorism law of 2005, which mandate the death penalty for those who commit terrorist acts and all those who enable terrorists to commit these crimes. Many women are detained under Article 4 of the law for alleged covering up for their husbands. Women appear to be disproportionately targeted for their relationships with male family members whom the government considers suspects. Articles 109 and 213 of the Code of Criminal Procedure allows arrest and convictions based on secret informant testimony, which may consist of unsupported allegations. Lack of accountability. Justice, Interior and Defence Ministry officials could not provide information regarding any official who had been prosecuted and convicted of torturing detainees. Officials did not respond to Human Rights Watch requests for detailed figures or how many women are detained or convicted on terrorism charges. One obstacle to ensuring justice is the danger that judges face when performing their duties. Current and former judges told Human Rights Watch that government officials and armed groups frequently harass and threaten judges. In 2012, armed militants killed 8 judges and made assassination attempts on 10 others. The justice system suffers from corruption and political interference. Human Rights Watch could not identify any instance in which the Office of General Prosecutor investigated torture allegations against law enforcement officials without the victim or family formally filing a complaint, although officials said that the Interior Ministry regulations dictate investigative judge to initiate torture complaints. I'm just going to go to the next steps. The problem plaguing the criminal justice system are systemic and massive. The judicial system requires an overhaul. Nevertheless, there are immediate steps the government can take to begin addressing the abuse women suffer within the criminal justice system. A full set of recommendations appear at the end of the report. The necessary changes, both general and specific to women, that should be undertaken include: 1. Acknowledging the prevalence of abuses of female detainees and condemning torture and ill treatment of pre-trial detention. 2. Ensuring that arrests of women comply with the Code of Criminal Procedure, which requires that defendants have access to lawyers with adequate time to prepare an effective defense and challenge evidence against them. 3. Reform of Iraq's anti-terrorism law, which provides significantly fewer protection for suspects and detainees than the Code of Criminal Procedure. 4. Amending articles in the Code of Criminal Procedure to eliminate use of testimony by secret informants, who are frequently paid, penalization of judges or security officials who use such testimony as a basis of arrest or conviction, giving detainees the right to sue if courts or security officials use such testimony to convict them. 5. Ensuring that detention only occurs in regular police stations and prisons, and initiating a police outreach campaign to inform Iraqis of their rights during arrest, detention, and sentencing. Iraq's future as a society based on the rule of law depends on establishing a credible Iraqi criminal justice system that embodies international standards for fairness and hold accountable officials responsible for serious crimes such as rape and torture. The failings of the criminal justice system documented in the report show that the Prime Minister al-Maliki government has so far failed to eliminate many of the abusive practices that Saddam Hussein institutionalized and United States-led coalition forces continued. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zainab. I'm sorry I arrived just after you'd begun speaking. We had some votes downstairs, and I was doing a memorial for Bob Crow, who died today. It's been a very, very sad loss. I'll go through the speakers, then we'll take questions. What time are we trying to finish?
Well, we can proceed until 8:15 to have us.
Well, let's see how long it
Yeah.
takes. Yeah. Okay, so each speaker is around 10 minutes. Is that the idea? Yeah. Thank you very much. So I'd now like you to welcome and listen to Narmeen Saleh al-Ruba, who is going to describe her detention and torture in Iraq. Thank you very much for coming. And I know it's...
Narmeen's first language is Arabic, second language is Swedish. So, and she's got a bit of a throat problem, so I might have to help her. That's okay.
That's absolutely fine. Whatever's fine. Thank you very much for coming and sharing your experiences with us. You're very welcome.
My name is Narmeen. I am 27 years old, Iraqi holder of a Swedish passport. I am a mother of 8 years old Zainab, born with cerebral palsy as a result of my being kicked in the stomach and tortured with electric. While I was pregnant with her.
So I'm going to continue. My husband, Shawqi Ahmed Omar, an engineer, Salah, his 9-year-old son from a previous marriage, and I entered Iraq legally from Syria in June 2004 to visit family, friends, for my husband to establish a branch of an American company owned in the US by his brother. In October 29, 2004, my husband and I were invited to my uncle's house in Zangana, Baghdad, for an engagement party. We decided to stay overnight. I was 4 months pregnant with my daughter at that time. At 10 p.m., the American soldiers attacked the house, surprising us. They blew up the main door, broke in from all doors without any warning. They came into the room where I was sitting with my husband, with weapons and dogs. They started to hit my husband before asking any questions. They were hitting him with their gun butts on his head and all over his body. My husband was bleeding a lot from the wounds inflicted due to the severe beating. They herded the other people in the house, including my parents, into the other rooms. I tried to stop the soldiers, to plead with them to stop beating my husband, but they would not. There were so many US soldiers there, they filled the room. One of them hit me on the head and knocked me to the ground. I lost consciousness for a while. They then let a black dog attack me. I was afraid of dogs, and I was shaking with fear. They made me squat on the balls of my feet, blindfolded me, and tied my hands behind my back. All the time, they were still beating my husband, who never resisted them. The raid lasted 4 hours. I found out later that all the money and the jewelry that were in the house, including those worn by women, were taken that night. All men in the house were arrested. They took my husband and me in their vehicles to an unknown location. While I was in the vehicle, they told me I needed to confess or they would rape me. Then they put me into an airplane and took me to a place of interrogation. I spent 16 days there. During the time, the interrogations didn't stop for 1 minute. Interrogators came in one after the other. They tried in every way to make me say what they wanted me to say. They used cursing and bad language to humiliate me. Other times they were beating and then electricity. They threw cold water on me and again threatened to rape me if I didn't confess. They told me they would send me to Abu Ghraib and do to me what they did to the people there. And they would take me there and rape me. I did not know what I was. I found out later it was the notorious secret prison of Camp Na'ma. They tortured and beat me a lot. And when they found out I was pregnant, they told me they would kill the child in my womb. Then they concentrated their beatings and electricity on my abdomen area. I could hear the torture of my husband. He was in the next room. They took me to an interrogation room to witness them using electricity on my husband's genitals, concentrating the torture there. They put his head in a cold water. They used sleep deprivation. They took me 3 times in front of my husband and threatened to rape me in front of him if he did not confess. They kept telling him they would rape his 9-year-old son in front of him. This was a lie because they did not have Salah, but my husband did not know that. All the time, I was kept in a room, 1 meter by 1 meter. I was blindfolded, my hands were tied behind my back, and they made me squat, balancing on the balls of my feet for hours at a time. And sleep wasn't allowed. I did not sleep for 16 days. They kept trying to make me take a pill. I did not know what it was. I refused, but they forced me to take it. After 16 days, they dropped me on the street. I had no idea where. After I got out, I went to a specialist doctor, and she told me that for sure my child would have been affected by the torture and likely to be not a normal child. After that, I did not hear anything about my husband for a few months, until I got a letter through the Red Cross telling me that he was in solitary confinement in Camp Buka in Basra. Basra is 7 hours away by car from Baghdad. I would make appointments to visit my husband, go all the way there, and they would refuse to let me see him. This happened several times. My daughter was only a few months old. Months would go by, and we wouldn't hear anything about my husband. Then later we knew he stayed 9 continuous months in solitary confinement. During that time, they continued to interrogate my husband, and were telling him they would rape me in front of him, just to threaten him. It was on June 24, 2010. Shawki had a trial. He met his lawyer for the first time that day. He was convicted and sentenced to 15 years for illegally entering Iraq. This is a false charge. Otherwise, why did not they convict me of the same charge? After an appeal in February 2011, the sentence was reduced to 7 years. Yet to date, my husband the Iraqi authorities refused to release my husband. My husband was in the last group of prisoners to be turned over to the Iraqi authorities. In July 15, 2011, he was in the airport prison, Camp 7. Before his arrest, my husband was in good health. Now he suffers from high blood pressure, stomach and digestive problems, ulcers and irritable bowel. He has prostate problems, and he's not allowed to have any medications. Prison food is very poor quality, and the guards try to poison prisoners by putting bleach in their food. Pictures of him smuggled out of the jail shows he continues to suffer torture and maltreatment. I am here to appeal to you to help me with the immediate release of my innocent husband in accordance with Article 295 of the Iraqi Criminal Procedure Code, as he has already served his sentence. I have this appeal leaflet. Please take one with you and take action. My appeal is supported by Amnesty International. The Iraqi government should immediately give my husband access to his lawyer and to medical care. The Iraqi government should immediately take steps to guarantee his safety and welfare. I continue to ask, why is my husband still in prison? What has his children done to deserve this? What have I done to deserve this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And do you have enough copies of the leaflet? Please all take one and read at the end of it the details and how we can then raise the issue as one of support. Okay? Thank you very much. Will you be able to take some questions when the other two speakers have concluded? Fine, thank you. I'd now like to invite Mike Phipps, who's a co-founder of Iraqi Occupation Focus, to speak to us about the issue of legality and accountability in the law. Mike, you're very welcome.
Thanks, Jeremy. Well, there aren't many meetings on Iraq these days, and nonetheless, Iraq is back in the news, and once more it's Anbar province and Fallujah at its heart that is making the news. Nearly 400,000 people have fled Anbar, as you'll know, since fighting started there at the end of last year. And according to the United Nations, 65,000 people fled the fighting in the towns of Fallujah and Ramadi in 1 week alone. And of course the narrative peddled by the Iraqi government and picked up by the mainstream media is this is entirely the fault of Al-Qaeda in the towns. It's not particularly accurate, but it has helped to serve an immediate delivery of arms to the Iraqi regime from its American puppeteers to help quell the protests there. These protests actually began over a year ago, demanding the freeing of tens of thousands of detainees who have been held without charge by the security forces, and the kind of things that have been happening to them have been already spoken about today, and I won't revisit that. And of course last year alone the state executed 169 people, putting it third in the league, as it were, behind China and Iran. The Iraqi government's accusation of al-Qaeda links was made to justify a ferocious siege and bombardment of Ramadi and Fallujah. Human Rights Watch has accused the regime of indiscriminate mortar fire in civilian neighbourhoods and killing its own citizens unlawfully. Hundreds of people have been killed and more than 200,000, some would say 300 to 400,000 have now been displaced. The Pentagon is considering following up its armed shipments with the deployment of more troops in the region to train Iraqi forces. This is almost 10 years to the day after the first round of collective punishment was inflicted on Fallujah, when US forces killed between 4,000 and 5,000 people, wounded a further 6,000, mainly civilians, using weapons banned such as white phosphorus, in what can only be described as one of the worst war crimes of the new century. Now US forces are back, training Iraqi soldiers in Jordan, according to recent reports. Nonetheless, any fresh deployment will not generate the same kind of headlines that were generated 10 years ago. Recent writers recognise that the form of modern occupation has now changed. You can forget large footprint occupations and think instead of special operations forces working on their own, training, fighting beside allied militaries with special ops advisors, commandos, using spying and intelligence, the use of drone aircraft, and launching cyber attacks. This approach, some say, constitutes nothing less than a new Obama doctrine in military activity. The UK as well also understands the changing military framework. Global Research recently reported, in December 2007, Major General Graham Binns, commander of British forces in Basra, which was handed back to Iraq at the end of 2007, he's now returned to Basra in the revolving door between the US and the UK, armies and mercenary companies. Binns, who left the army in 2010, has now joined Aegis Defence Services, whose board members include people from this august establishment, who've been employed by the new governor of Basra. And among other things, the Major General says that Aegis will be asked to provide help with setting up specialised CCTV detention and checkpoint systems across the city, establishing a ring of steel, a security system to thwart suicide bombers, just like old times, the report says. And there's something, it seems to me, quite shameless about this kind of activity, which the Brits in particular excel at pulling off. It's paralleled by the appointment by the government of a new trade representative to Iraq, whom Haifa has written about recently. This is Baroness Emma Nicholson, who campaigned against the Saddam Hussein regime and its abuse of human rights, and was a prominent vocal supporter of the 2003 invasion to free the Iraqi people from terrible tyranny. She's now shifted her role, Baroness Nicholson, from an outspoken champion of human rights to being executive chairman of the Iraq Britain Business Council. Addressing a conference last month, the Baroness pointed out that the country's economy was one of the most vibrant in the world, despite the current challenging situation in some regions. That would be Anbar again, I guess, and specifically Fallujah. According to a Truth Out report by Dar Jamal this month, doctors, residents and NGO workers in Fallujah are accusing the Iraqi government of war crimes and crimes against humanity that have occurred as a result of this ongoing attack on the city. Dr. Ahmed Shami, the chief of resident doctors at Fallujah General Hospital, told Truth Out that since the Iraqi government forces began shelling Fallujah in early January 2014, at least 109 civilians have been killed and 632 wounded, including children. He said 5 of the dead are women, 35 of the wounded. Many children have been killed in cold blood, and there are many young people from the city who the Iraqi army has killed and burned their bodies. The Iraqi army refuses to allow medical supplies into the city, bombing bridges and roads to prevent their delivery. Some reports say Fallujah's General Hospital has been attacked by government bombardment on 8 separate occasions. So this is the regionally challenging situation that Emma Nicholson refers to. But actually things are pretty bleak nationally as well. The criminal justice system, as we know, is corrupt and murderous. And last year 1,200 people were on death row. Much of the media is sectarian. Iraq remains the most dangerous country in the world for journalists. A new personal status law, against which women demonstrated very courageously on Saturday, threatens to bring back child marriage. Around 1/3 of people are below the poverty line. This breeds extraordinary deprivation and desperation. Iraq is now a centre for human organ trafficking, female sex trafficking and child slavery. Business opportunities indeed. Emma Nicholson understands that talk about human rights these days is passé. Britain's coalition is a government that doesn't care much for human rights of its own citizens, let alone anyone else's. Its housing policy has been criticised by the UN for penalising the vulnerable. Its police routinely infiltrate and spy on those fighting miscarriages of justice. And last week we read around 168,000 older people have stopped receiving help with the essential tasks of eating, washing and getting up and getting dressed as a result of continuing cuts to social care, in a report from Age UK. So human rights in this country are pretty cheap these days as well. And it's not just the government, it's the mainstream media as well, which is equally compliant. In the little noticed Al-Swady inquiry in London, British soldiers 10 years ago, or 10 years on, stand accused of the torture and murder of Iraqis in their custody. Corpses showed evidence of eyes missing, tongues cut out, noses cut off. Human rights abuses, but no one's interested. And then in January, a bombshell. A devastating 250-page dossier detailing allegations of beatings, electrocution, mock executions and sexual assault was sent to the International Criminal Court and could result in some of Britain's leading defence figures facing prosecution for systematic war crimes.
Well done.
General Sir Peter Wall, the head of the British Army, former Defence Secretary to Geoffrey Hume, former Defence Minister Adam Ingram are among those named in the report entitled The Responsibility of UK Officials for War Crimes Involving Systematic Detainee Abuse in Iraq from 2003 to 2008. The dossier draws on cases of more than 400 Iraqis, representing thousands of allegations of mistreatment amounting to war crimes of torture or cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment. They range from hooding prisoners to burning, electric shocks, threats to kill and cultural and religious humiliation. Other forms of alleged abuse include sexual assault, mock executions, threats of rape, death and torture. But in these tough economic times, it seems, business opportunities will trump the luxury of human rights, even when it would have been politically expedient to champion them in the past. We now are governed by an elite with the morality of the hedge fund, Ben Judah recently wrote. We, however, I hope, operate to a different moral standard. In 2008, on July the 19th, which is an auspicious date, as every genuine internationalist will recognise, a conference in North London launched a campaign calling for justice for Iraq, calling on those states responsible for the invasion and occupation to terminate their illegal and immoral war, and we expressed our solidarity with the Iraqi people in their struggle for peace, justice and self-determination. And we demanded an immediate end to the US and UK occupation, urgent action to fully address the current humanitarian crises facing Iraq's people, an end to foreign interference in Iraq's affairs, including its oil industry, so that Iraqis can exercise their right to self-determination, compensation and reparations from those countries responsible for war and sanctions on Iraq, and prosecution of all those responsible for war crimes, human rights abuses, and the theft of Iraq's resources. In short, justice for Iraq. We asked, what will happen to the tens of thousands of Iraqis, including children, still detained with no prospect of legal process? Who will clean up the cluster bombs and depleted uranium warheads, which in heavily bombarded areas such as Fallujah have caused a huge increase in birth defects? How can Iraq extricate itself from the oil extraction contracts signed away by its puppet government and return to full sovereignty over economic affairs? What can be done to heal the trauma of long-term effects that distort the development of all post-conflict societies, often violently? And what kind of financial compensation should the perpetrators pay for their illegal and immoral occupation? These questions still need answering. Ordinary people are not indifferent to these issues. There may be no official bringing to justice of the war criminals that perpetrated this catastrophic crime against Iraq, but others certainly have the appetite. The Independent reported on January the 27th, quote, he might have quit his job immediately afterwards, but the London barman who attempted a citizen's arrest on Tony Blair has been rewarded with a sizable bounty for his efforts. Twiggy Garcia was working at Tramshed in East London when the opportunity arose to confront the former Prime Minister. As Mr. Blair was dining with friends and family, the DJ turned barman laid a hand on the Prime Minister's shoulder and tried to arrest him for crimes against peace, namely the decision to launch an unprovoked war against Iraq. The website that inspired his action, George Monbiot's Arrest Blair website, has now awarded him a quarter of their funds, a total of £2,222.
Well,
A similar campaign has been launched in Australia to arrest John Howard, the Prime Minister who sent troops to Iraq from that country. So this and other initiatives will continue, and I want to particularly salute the organisers of this meeting, without whose tireless work these issues would never be aired in this country. Your campaign, our campaign, continues until all of these issues are fully identified and addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Absolutely excellent. Can I now ask you to welcome Haifa Zangana to speak to us? She's an old friend, brilliant writer, fantastic campaigner, and I'm full of admiration.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you. Thank you all. Mike just mentioned very quickly something about a new law, a new family law, or
can you hear in the back?
I think you need to speak up a bit higher.
Okay. Yes.
Or maybe I don't think they're in operation. They're not loudspeakers. They're only for recording for committees. They're not recording at the moment.
I'm going to focus on the family law, the draft of the new family law, which been suggested and drafted by the Minister of Justice. He is a member of Fadila party, the Virtue Party, and it's a Shiite party, and the new law is called Ja'fari law. This has been passed on the 25th of February to the Parliament, and it has been approved by them. So I submitted the bill to Parliament for approval. The draft was the personal status law applicable now covers marriage, divorce, as well as issues of inheritance and adoption. This law, the current law, was issued in 1959, and it's called Law Number 188, and it was considered, and is still considered, one of the most advanced family laws in the region. It has been based at that time, and is still, on both the Sunni and Shiite, on the Sharia law and all, and it's been acceptable by all citizens. Secular people accepted, religious people accepted, Muslims, Christians, Yazidis. It's been accepted by all citizens because it represents all citizens. This new draft is only specifically is for the Shiite sect. If it will be passed, this is, politically, if we look at it, and socially, is quite dangerous issue. First of all, it will fragment the society. Instead of having one family law, we will have multiple, because part of this law is entitling all other sects and religions to have their own laws. So we will have multi-laws. Each sect, each religion got their own, and they have different ways. This is going to really enforce sectarianism in Iraq, and it's scary. It is really scary for many people. They think we are suffering from sectarianism. We don't want to have it deeper and deeper rooted in our society. This will also apply to each family, because if the husband is a Shiite, if the woman is a Sunni or anything, so each one of them should follow or they all become Shiite in order to be accepted by this law, and they do it. Well, the current family law, legal experts worked on its development in the last 60 years. So it's actually a very enhanced, very good law for everybody. If there are any objections by the current government, it should have been like kind of amendments, rather than either issuing a new law or dividing it. So why this law? How they justify it? Well, I'm going to quote one of the religious figures, Hussein al-Ma'rabi. He is the lawmaker of Fadila party leader. He says, this is the core of the freedom. Based on the Iraqi constitution, each component of the Iraqi people has the right to regulate its personal status in line with the instruction of its religion and doctrine. And this law is expected to encourage other sects and other religions to develop similar legislation. But I mean, this really is sparking real fear among Iraqis because it also includes numerous violations of human rights. This is something which has been struggling for decades. Human rights. We want to have human rights in Iraq. We want to put an end to torture, the stories of torture. We want to have the citizenships rights, the rule of law and respect of international law, local law and international law. Now we are taking back like 100 years back, whether for Iraqi women, children, or society as a whole. I'll give you a few examples about this new. Article 16 allows females to marry from the age of 9 and males at the age of 15. Moreover, according to this article, a judge can legally marry a couple below these ages. So it's a child marriage now legalized by the government and by law, with the consent of their guardians, father or grandfather. Under Iraq's current personal status law, the legal age of marriage is 18 for both men and women. Therefore, should the draft law be approved, it would legalize child marriage and increase minors' vulnerability to sex trafficking, and it breaches child protection set out in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which Iraq ratified in 1994. According to Article 63 of the proposed Ja'fari draft law, it will prevent Muslim males from permanently marrying non-Muslim females. Permanently. What does that mean? That means you are allowed to have a marriage which is not permanent, which is called mut'a. Mut'a is a temporary marriage which takes place usually between a male or female, most often at religious places, in the presence of a religious figure, a cleric, and it could last from 10 minutes to 20 years, 100 years, whatever. But it has, women have no right whatsoever in this kind of marriage, and it's not legal. It's never been legal in Iraq. It's not legal now or ever. But this one is going to legalize it, especially if you marry a non-Muslim woman, so you can do that. For sexual pleasure, of course. In other words, the proposed law forbids interreligious marriages. And this is the danger, because Iraqi society consists not just of Muslims, but of other religions, other sects as well. So intermarriage would differentiate Iraq, for example, from Northern Ireland, where there are no intermarriages. But in Iraq, if you look at this room and ask each one of them, who's your father, who's your mother, what is their sex, what's their religion, you'll see all of it. My mother is a Sunni, my father is a Shiite, my grandparents are Christians. This is the Iraqi society, the Iraqi family, the base of the society, and they are destroying it. It's not just being a Sunni or a Shi'i or about freedom. Article 104 of the draft permits unconditional polygamy. Polygamy in the Iraq we've been brought up in, almost non-existent it was, because it was so difficult for a man to get a second wife. It's almost impossible. So it was not there. In fact, a man he cannot get married unless there are the restrictions. One of them, he must have the acceptance of the wife herself. The wife has to be ill for certain, terminally ill or something. It's so difficult for the man to get a second wife. Never mind having 4 wives. But this law is allowing 4 wives, and also it goes further into detailing how to deal with those 4 wives every night, how to sleep, how the man to sleep with the wife, and he give us all the details. And I don't have the time to take you into a sexual orgy of this kind. Really is this kind of it. So it is how a husband should allocate his time among his wife. In the case of 4 wives, the husband should sleep at the home of each woman 1 night each week. In the case of 3 wives, the husband should sleep at the home of each wife for 1 night and then choose which wife to spend additional nights with. So it's quite a complicated issue for the man as well as women. I mean, it's they should demonstrate in the streets trying to find a way to get out of it. This is against Iraqi law. Absolutely against Iraqi law, but they are proposing it. Under Article 101 of the draft law, men have the right to have sex with their wives anytime they want, and wives cannot leave their marital house without their husband's permission. This means that women, as wives, under this law would be reduced to objects of sexual pleasure whenever a husband desires and without regard to her wishes or state of mind. She has no right to deny him that whatsoever. According to legal experts and social workers, under the 2nd article of the Universal Declaration on Elimination of Violence Against Women, by the way, Iraq signed this treaty, is a signature of the treaty. Such behavior would constitute rape. But never mind. Meanwhile, Article 25 of the Personal Status Law, which is the current one, allows a woman to disobey her husband if he behaves tyrannically and harms her by failing to provide adequate housing or care should she fall ill. So the protection is available for women here. If the new law claims that we are going to protect women, it's all available in the law. So Article 126, making women a tool, a mere tool for pleasure. It states that husbands are not required to pay financial support, nafaqah, when a wife is either a minor or a senior, like in my case, for example, and hence unable to sexually satisfy them. So in both cases, a woman has no right for money if she divorced, whatever, because it's... And by the way, this law consists of 15 articles, or I don't know, Sabah maybe knows better than me. There is, and each one really makes you feel not just angry, but let me use the word disgusted. Really. I mean, I can't find any other explanation. I'm trying to read articles and laws, but excuse me, this is beyond any law. And if they are claiming, and this is because we are in a government and we are the majority and this is political or whatever, no. These being their kind of tribal things, being before Islam, if somebody claiming this is what Islam is, it isn't what Islam is. In fact, the Association of Muslim Scholars issued today very strong statement against this draft law, declaring this has nothing to do with Islam or the practice of Islam. And if you look at all the records, I mean, by human rights or what United Nations, you'll see majority of countries practicing this, they are not even Muslims. In Africa, the top of those countries this. So whoever wants to tell you when you talk about this, these are Islamic or Muslim, they are not. They are pre-Islamic, they are traditional societies somewhere else in Africa and other. Now, one thing that, I mean, okay, this is going to segregate and exactly, I mean, almost destroy the society and the family. But also, we must look at what happened to the child at the age of 9 or under the age of 9 when they get married. Because health-wise, and very rarely people look at it, this is destroying them. Destroying health-wise because they're going to get pregnant when they are a little bit older, and they become mothers while they are children themselves. They become mothers for children themselves. So they are under the control of this husband, or no matter how brilliant he is and good and fantastic, this is a recipe for disaster. Yes. It also will put an end, and this is very important, for their education. As a child, she is entitled for education. And without education, we know very well what will happen to a girl or a boy. Because this is damaging to the boys as well. But although, I mean, mainly is the whole society. So this is, and about the decision making, how mature she will be to grow up in such circumstances and under such pressure and all the whole thing. My conclusion is the way things are going in Iraq now, a country with an array of ethnic groups and nationalities might ultimately shred its judicial system and divide society into blocks, lacking a common legal framework which runs contrary to the concept of citizenship altogether. This law, no matter how it is marketed, will damage what Iraqi women have been struggling to get rid of for over a century. And it is a huge degrading step backward to Iraqi society, and we need to act. We need to act as soon as possible. We need to act by all means possible, each one of us. And we ask our friends as well, not Emma Nicholson, she's busy, or I don't know, people, but there are ways of putting pressure on the Iraqi government, on the Iraqi regime, to do some changes. At least if people are really believing in human rights. And this is a complete, a horrendous violation of a human right. Thank you very much.
Haifa, thank you very, very much indeed. We'll now take points and questions of discussion. Just to add for practical things, I'm going to be in Geneva next week for the Interparliamentary Union and the Human Rights Council, and we have arranged a meeting with the Iraqi delegation there, and I will be raising these issues with them there as a way of giving some practical effect from this meeting. Thank you very much for what you've said. Questions, points, discussion, and can we sort of, before we conclude, practically what we want people to do, because I think what's sticking in my mind is what Mike said and what Haifa said, is that sadly the human rights abuses in Iraq no longer get the front page, or any other page for that matter, most of the time, yet they're systematically getting worse and worse and worse. And there's a kind of assumption that it's all okay. Well, it's not. You know? And so we've got to take some practical steps of things we can do in places where we raise it.